Hi, good evening, everyone, and welcome to the 24th session of PD in Your Pocket. What a great turnout. My name is Rachel, and I'm delighted to be welcoming you to this session on safe transport in family daycare. Before we begin, I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the country in which we meet today. So while we recognise that we are on many different lands with many traditional owners, I'm currently presenting on the land of the Gadigal people. And I'd like to acknowledge them and recognise their continuing connection to land, waters and culture. I would also like to pay my respects to their elders past and present and emerging. I also acknowledge that Aboriginal families have cared for and educated children on this land for tens of thousands of years. So now just a few housekeeping. You may be familiar, but if not, PD in Your Pocket is run by Family Daycare Association of New South Wales. And when you registered, you would have been sent a booklet. So perhaps that was one week ago or 2 weeks ago. So I hope you all had a read through that to prepare for tonight. If not, that's always accessible to you. And if you are listening to this as a podcast, the link is nswfdc.org.au/PD in your pocket. At the end of today's session, we'll also be sending out a survey, and we urge you to fill that out as it gives us some feedback on more of what you want to see and how we can facilitate that for you moving forward. So if you remember, we asked you some questions when you registered for this session, and these are the results of what we learned from you. So here we have question 1. Do you currently transport children in your service? So 60% of you said yes, 27% said no, and 13% said not currently, but looking into this for the future. So for that 13% of you that don't, you're in the right place, because tonight we're going to go through everything you'll need to consider for safe transport of children. Question 2, what is the reason for transporting children? So 45% of you said excursions, and I assume under that you also mean your regular play dates. Perhaps you go to the library or the museum with your children. And then we have 2% of you who do the pick up and drop off of children from their own homes. 25% of you do the school pick up and drop off for children in your care. 25% of you don't use transport with children at all. And there's another 2% of mystery. Do you ever take children in your care on public transport? So 73% of you said no. And 16% of you said no, but you'd like to in the future. So for that 16%, today we'll be going through public transport safety rules and procedures. So hopefully that can help you when you do decide to do that in the future. And so here we have, does your service have an excursion policy? So 3% said no, 2% said yes, and 95% said unsure. Now, it's okay for that 95% of you that have said unsure, as it shows that we're identifying gaps that we can improve on. And lastly, how confidently do you feel around compliance in transporting children safely? So I'm very impressed with this answer. 77% of you said, I am very aware of the compliance and best practice requirements, including authorizations and risk management forms. So well done. What exactly are we covering tonight? So we're covering what is safe transport, regulatory requirements for transporting children, policies and procedures, safety equipment and safety standards, risk assessments and management, authorizations for transportation, roles and responsibilities, guidelines for safe transport and travel, public transport safety, and lastly, of course, additional resources. So let's start by having a look at what safe transport looks like in the context of family daycare. As family daycare educators, you may be responsible for transporting children as part of your service. So this may include driving them from A to B, walking children to school and back, or perhaps catching public transport. So it's important to know what transportation may present additional risks to children, depending on how it occurs and how transitions between vehicle and an education and care premises and other locations are managed. So these risks apply equally to single trips, so that would be things like an excursion, or during periods of regular transportation, as we mentioned, maybe the daily school drop-offs and pickups. So to manage these risks, all governments have introduced new requirements to strengthen the arrangements for transport that occurs when children are under the care of education and care services. So the new requirements were introduced in March 2003, and although they are not applicable specifically to family daycare, they offer an opportunity to ensure transportation arrangements at your service are in line with best practice guidelines and they keep children in your care safe. So when we talk about transport in relation to family daycare, we are referring to cars, walking, prams, minibuses, as well as public transport, such as trains, buses, and light rails. Now I'm going to pose a question that you can answer in the chat. Are there any means of transport here that we haven't mentioned that you potentially use in your service? Yep, so Claire's mentioned bikes. Oh, Belinda's mentioned ferries. What a lovely service you run, Belinda. Yep, and we have car. Excellent. Robin's mentioned council bus. Oh, and Fatima's mentioned van. These are excellent. So a few of these will be covered tonight. A good starting point is to review the compliance required when transporting children. So the national laws and regulations should always be the foundation of your practice, service management, and personal conduct as a family daycare educator. So the national law states under section 167 that a family daycare educator must ensure that every reasonable precaution is taken to protect a child being educated and cared for as part of a family daycare service. So that means that we are protecting them from risk and harm and any likely causes of injury. Then under section 165, the law also states that the approved provider of an education and care service must ensure that children being educated and cared for are adequately supervised at all times while under the care of the service. So we have found that these two laws are the most relevant when it comes to ensuring compliance with transporting children. The requirements of the Education and Care Services national law and regulations apply whenever a service is operating. So excursions and transportation are sometimes provided as part of your education and care. And they require a range of considerations, so under the compliance with the law and regs. So these requirements also apply to services regulated under the Supplementary Provision Act. So for excursions and transportation that are a part of education and care, staff must consider children leaving the education and care service premises, child enrolment records to be kept by approved provider and family daycare educator, authorizations to be kept on enrolment record, transport risk assessments, conduct of risk assessments for transporting of children, authorization for service to transport children, and education and care service must have policies and procedures. So unfortunately, the reason for these changes was due to the recent death of a 3-year-old who was left on a service minibus. And there was also a case of a 14-month-old forgotten on another service bus. And this just illustrates that tragic mistakes can happen when children are being transported by their service. So no parent, caregiver, or any person wants to see a young life being put in danger in this way. So to better manage transportation risks and to help stop terrible errors, the Education Council introduced these requirements in 2020 to strengthen arrangements when children are being transported under their care service. So these requirements came into effect on the 1st of October in 2020. So let's see how children are now being safeguarded as they travel from A to B. So the Education Council has agreed that under the Education and Care Service regulations, these requirements for safe transportation and children apply to providers of education and care services that offer or arrange the transport of children. So the requirements cover the journey between home, care, and other locations. So that might be in a one-off excursion, or it might be on a regular basis. And they mean that the service must conduct transport-specific risk assessments. You must get written authorizations from parents or other authorized people, and you must have transport-specific policies and procedures in place. So I just want to note here as well that other changes to regulation have been made in regard to safe transport, and those changes commenced on the 1st of March in 2023. So these changes apply to the approved providers and centre-based services. However, it is good to know and always be conscious of best practice. And of course, we need to be aware of links to the National Quality Framework. So the safe transport of children falls under Quality Area 2, which is children's health and safety. So it falls under Standard 2.2, which is supervision. So at all times, reasonable precautions and adequate supervision ensure children are protected from harm and hazard. And element 2.2.2, which is incident and emergency management, so which is plans to effectively manage incidents and emergencies are developed in consultation with relevant authorities, practiced and implemented. So when reviewing what your service currently does, so their current practice around Standard 2.2, in the Guide to the National Quality Framework, they have some critical thinking and reflective questions that you can always ponder. So I'm going to give you a few examples of what some of those questions are in terms of safe transport. So they include, how do we discuss and manage transport arrangements, including supervision and safety considerations? So for example, child safety in educators' vehicles and safe fitting of car seats. How do we ensure children are alerted to safety issues and encouraged to develop the skills to assess and manage risks to their own safety? And how do we conduct risk assessments for potential excursions and plan for children's safety during excursions? So by the end of this webinar, I hope you can reflect on those questions and have some excellent answers to implement for your own service. So these are the policies and procedures that we should have in terms of safe transport within your family daycares. So there's safe transportation of children, accident, incident, trauma, authorizations to transport children, excursions, transport, risk assessment, transporting children management plan, supervision, administration of first aid, child protection, medical conditions, delivery and collection of children, transportation other than being a part of an excursion, and signing in children as being in attendance. So this list looks extensive, but it obviously covers a range of areas. So, you know, one policy such as accident, illness and trauma doesn't just cover safe transportation, it covers a wide range of things. So now knowing what the policies and procedures are, I'm going to navigate to the chat quickly, and I'm going to ask you how confident you feel if you do regularly transport children, that you do have these policies and procedures in place. So I'll just give you a sec. So the question was, how confident, if you do transport children, are you that you have these policies in place? Wonderful. Kerry said very. I love to hear that. Lots of very confident. That's fab, everyone. Yeah. All the veries are flying through, very confident. That's wonderful. So let's talk about what equipment we might need for the safe transportation of children. So now we kind of have a good understanding of compliance, and now we need to look at equipment. So equipment may fall under car seats, booster seats. Of course, you have prams. I have an example here for high visibility vests. So they're the bright orange construction vests, but you can buy them in cute little child sizes, and they're excellent for when you're going out in public. So you always have visibility of the children in your care. We have pram platform attachments and helmets. So for child car seats and booster seats, they're obviously used for transportation in cars. They must be age appropriate, and your child restraints and booster seats must be fitted and adjusted specifically to the child using the seat. So of course they have the little straps that you can pull on and snug them in, or you can loosen them. You, of course, must have a first aid kit. So that's a well-stocked first aid kit, and it should be available in case of any injuries or emergencies during transportation. Mobile phones and emergency contact lists, of course, are also very important. It should be readily available in a case of an emergency. And it should also have a list of your contact numbers of all the children you're transporting on hand. So now that we've mentioned car seats and boosters, I think it's important to look at the Australian standards. So car seats and boosters are, I would say, the most critical piece of equipment used to transport children in cars. And by law, every car seat sold in Australia must meet strict requirements set out in the Australian standards. So that falls under Australian Standard 1754. So what a standard is a standard is a published document which sets out specifications and procedures designed to ensure that a material or a product or a method or service is fit for its purpose and consistently performs in the way it was intended. So, did you know it is actually illegal to use a car seat from overseas as they don't meet the Australian standard? So that's why it's essential we purchase items that do meet these standards, and we ensure that the high quality and care and safety of our equipment and our children. So some other examples of equipment that family daycare operators would need to be aware of the safety standards would be standards for helmets and safety standards for prams and strollers. So here we can see the safety standards that apply to childcare seats and accessories. This is, of course, available in your book if you want to take another screenshot. This is excellent to always have on hand, especially if you are one of those percents that are considering now implementing transport within your service. This is a good reference to have. So the standards and the law. So on their own, the standards are voluntary. There's no requirement for the public to comply with these standards. However, state and Commonwealth governments often refer to the Australian standards, or jointly, it looks like the Australian New Zealand standards. So that's the AS/NZS in their legislation. So when this happens, these standards become mandatory. So it is mandatory for all child seats to be used, that are used, bought or sold in Australia, that they do meet that AS/NZS 1754 standard. So the standards label should be on the packaging of any new car seat, or perhaps it's on the car seat itself. Now, the reason that we put these safety measures into place is to ensure children are protected from harm and hazard in the event of an accident. So road trauma is one of the leading causes of injury and death for children and young people. And a contributing factor to these incidents is children being placed in the wrong car seat for their size or for their age. Perhaps their car seat may also be incorrectly used or fitted. So research has shown that an approved and properly fitted car seat may reduce the risk of death or serious injury by 70%. So that's a massive statistic. And that's why we want to bring authorised restraint and fitting services to your attention. So how many of you here tonight have had your car seats and boosters installed by a qualified professional or checked for safety? So if you want to place that in the chat. So Rachel Bartlett has said yes every year. Lots of yeses coming through. Yep. And I absolutely agree with that. And there's nothing more fickle than trying to install a car seat. Am I right? But what I did see is that they now have, when you install it and you install it correctly, a little button clicks and it turns green. So I think that's fabulous. I noticed that on my son's one, which I didn't install myself. I went to someone professionally. So the reason that I'm bringing this up is that New South Wales, Road Safety of New South Wales, they have a website. So here's the website link. You can go to it, you put in your postcode, and they will take you to an authorised car seat installer. So that car seat installer will inspect and adjust your car seat to make sure it's installed correctly. Fit child car seats that require vehicle modifications. They can install more anchorage points, retrofit lap and lap sash seat belts, and they can show you the correct way to use your child car seat so that you can be confident in that your child is safe. So I also want to mention that I know many local councils actually run 2 days a year where they do child car seat checks for free. So they will either install for free or they will check one that you've already installed. So I urge you to use that website. And if you are thinking about your child seat safety, please use that resource. So let's talk about car seat requirements. I thought this was a wonderful visual that shows you how car seat requirements work according to the national child restraint laws. So if we look over here, we've got up to 6 months, which is the approved rear-facing child car seat. From 6 months to 4 years, you have approved rear or forward-facing child car seat. And I know that research shows now to keep rear-facing for as long as possible. As long as your child is meeting the weight requirements, that's the safest position. Then you've got from 4+ years, approved forward-facing child car seat or booster seat. And then from 145 centimetres or taller, which is the suggested minimum height to use adult lap sash bands. So of course, if the child is too small for the child restraint specific to their age, they should be kept in their current child restraint until it is safe for them to move to the next level. And alternatively, if the child is too large for the child restraint specific to their age, they may move to the next level of child restraint. I'm just going to navigate to the chat quickly. So Corinna's asked, if you don't do this training and you get an authorised fitter to install the car seat, if you remove the car seat, you have to pay them to install. Yes, potentially that's true. Okay, so let's look at car seat expiring. So in Australia, child restraints and boosters are typically assigned an expiration date, which is usually between 6 and 10 years from their manufacturer. So to promote the protection of children against harm and hazards, it's recommended that you replace these seats once they expire. This is because the material in the seat can degrade over time, which increases the risk of failure and reduces the seat's effectiveness in protecting a child. This is also a good time to mention that if you are looking at secondhand car seats, there are some points to consider when choosing one to purchase. So if you're looking at secondhand car seats, you need to see if it's meeting the Australian standard, which of course is AS/NZS 1754. You need to be aware of the history of the restraint. So questions you need to ask are, has this car seat been involved in a car accident? Because if it has, it shouldn't be used. So the damage may not be visible. However, it may fail if placed under the stress of another accident. You need to look at if the restraint comes with all parts, including the instruction booklet. Is the restraint less than 6 years old? So from the date of manufacture. And I can show you on the next slide where this expiry date is located. And of course, is the restraint in good condition with no splits, cracks or stretch marks on the restraint shell and no frayed or torn or worn damaged straps? So here we are. This is an example of an expiration date that you should be able to find on your car seats. So there are different places of where you can find these. In this picture, you can see that the manufacturer date is highlighted in yellow, which is November 2011. And the expiry date is highlighted in red, which is in November 2017. And these are often found under the car seats, or I think potentially you might need to look behind the material behind the headrest. So you may be looking at moving your children who are school-aged just to a seatbelt, so a lap sash belt. They may be a bit old for a booster, but how do you know? So there's a 5-step test that can help assess whether your child is big enough, and answering yes to each step means that your child is ready for a seatbelt. So before we go through this, I just want to make an important note that family daycare educators should always communicate with the parent or the carer as to when the child should transition to a seatbelt. So some children may not use safety restraints in their own family car. However, based on requirements, family daycare educators should also continue to do so. So of course, this is a collaborative conversation. So we've got step 1, sits all the way back against the seat. Number 2, bend their knees comfortably over the front edge of the vehicle seat. Number 3, they can sit with the sash belt across their mid-shoulders. Number 4, sit with the lap belt across the top of their thighs. And number 5, stay seated in this position for the whole trip. So if you can answer yes to all 5, that means your child is ready for a seatbelt. Now, before we move on, we've just gone through compliance, Australian standards, safety equipment in cars, booster seats. So I just wanted to check in with everyone how you're all going. And if there's anything, any comments that you perhaps wanted to add or questions that you may have. Good, all good? Yep. Wonderful. All right, everyone seems all good. I'm going to keep moving along. So next up, we're coming to prams and strollers. So it's very likely that many of you here today are using prams or strollers when transporting children. And the term pram or stroller, they both tend to be used fairly loosely, and they generally mean the same product. Perhaps you might refer to a pram as when the baby's a newborn and they're maybe in that little capsule or the little bassinet attachment, whereas strollers you'd often refer to as when they're front and forward facing and they're a little bit older. So to keep children safe, it's important to follow the manufacturer's instructions carefully each time you use your pram or stroller. So in particular, you should be checking that your folding mechanisms are securely locked and in place to ensure that your pram or stroller can't collapse while your child is in it. And the following tips can also help reduce the risk of children falling out of the pram or stroller. So of course, strollers these days, they all have a 5 safety point harness. So it's two from the shoulders, 2 from the hips, and then 1 from the middle, and they all connect together. So you should always be using each 5. Research shows that even if you are just using perhaps the 2 straps or the 2 on the hip, and you're using 3 out of 5, the safety that a child experiences using 5 points versus the safety a child experiences using 3 points is different. So we obviously want to use 5 points. So as the children grow up, they become more mobile, and we have to teach them not to stand up or lean out of the pram or stroller. So they are also just designed for 1 child. So we have to make sure that there's only 1 child in there at a time in the seating position. Now let's look at ways to reduce the risk of the pram or stroller tipping over and injuring the child. So you've probably seen it. There's a funny video on, I don't know, Facebook or something. A mum, she's got a million bags on a baby handle. She's trying to talk on the phone. The pram tips over. So we don't want to be that mum. We put the bags in the basket underneath and we never hang them from the handles. We don't exceed the pram or stroller's weight limits, because this can cause instability and it can also break the pram. Watch for older children who are trying to climb on the pram or the stroller. So we need to teach children, as I said earlier, that the pram is only for 1. However, if you do have the pram platform, they're obviously more than welcome to stand on that, as that's a safe position for them. And here's how to reduce strangulation and suffocation risks around the pram or stroller. So when your pram or stroller is not in use, your straps should be done up. So there's no loose straps anywhere, and don't put any pillows or blankets in your pram or strollers. So next I want to talk about common distractions that we perhaps might experience when we're transporting children. So we've got visual distractions, physical distractions, cognitive distractions, and auditory distractions, excuse me. So it's imperative that educators are aware of the importance of focus and to ensure that no critical elements of child safety during transportation are compromised, or if external factors may interrupt a routine practice. So visual distractions are tasks that require you to take your eyes away from supervision of children or perhaps the road while you're driving. So some examples of visual distractions might be using your mobile phone. It could be checking the GPS. There could be weather conditions such as wind or heavy rain. And the following examples can apply to both while you're driving or just while you're out of your service with your children. So that might look like being distracted by irrelevant objects in the environment. So perhaps some birds or some animals going past. And perhaps there might be an information overload from displays. So I know many of you take your children to the library on a weekly basis. You might get distracted by the community news board, and that obviously is a visual distraction. There are physical distractions. So this is also known as manual distractions. So this is any time you take one or both of your hands off the steering wheel while driving. And some examples of this are, of course, eating and drinking, texting, searching for items that fell underneath the car seat, or reaching for items perhaps in the passenger seat or the back seat. And then you have cognitive distractions. So this is essentially an activity that demands mental attention and takes away focus from keeping children safe. So some examples of this are active conversations with colleagues or members of the community. Perhaps your mind is wandering, which is also called rumination, when you just overthink things in your head and you can't stop. There's also the inability to focus due to personal stress. And then, of course, we have auditory distractions, which could be any noises that affect our ability to hear, and they take away our attention from caring for children. So examples of these types of distraction includes listening to music at a high volume in the car. It could be traffic sounds such as sirens. It could be a phone conversation or a conversation with passengers, screaming children, and mobile phone notifications and ringtones. And in that slide, we just talked a lot about mobile phone use. So mobile phone use distraction came up a fair bit there. And so I want to draw your attention to this campaign that was run by Transport for New South Wales, and it's called Get Your Hand Off It. So Get Your Hand Off It was a campaign that was evolved to highlight the serious consequences of using your mobile phone illegally while driving, which of course could cost everything that you care about. So research shows that being distracted when driving, such as by using a mobile phone, increases the risk of a crash. So simply taking your eyes off the road for longer than 2 seconds doubles the risk of a crash. So if you're driving at 60 kilometers per hour and you look at your phone for 2 seconds, your car has traveled 33 meters blind. So just that short lapse of concentration can have lifelong consequences. Now, we all know that there are times when driving that you may need your mobile phone, for example, GPS or making an emergency call. But what are the rules about this? So this table is also from Transport New South Wales, and it's a really clear outline of what the rules of legal mobile phone use in New South Wales are. Now, we're going to go straight to unrestricted license holders because you wouldn't be able to transport children in your care and service if you were a learner or a P-plater. So let's have a look. So you can use it to make or receive a phone call as long as it's in its little holder, and here they've used the word cradle. You can use music or audio functions, but it has to be operated without touching. You can use a driver's aid, so that's your GPS systems, only if the phone is secured in a cradle, of course, also known as a holder, and it's fixed to your vehicle. You can access your driver's license, so if a police officer has asked you. And you can use the wallet function, so that means make a transaction. I know that phones now, you can access your credit card to them, so you just tap your phone. So this would be perhaps when you're doing a Macca's run or you're paying for parking, and it means that you're stationary. So let's, now that we have an idea of potential distractions when transporting children, I'd like to take a minute to go through some other risk factors that may be faced. So there are things like the experience of the driver and licensing conditions for the vehicle being used, the age, ability, needs and skills of a child being transported, the experience of the adults involved in transportation and their capacity for supervising children, movement of children between the vehicle and venues, including children being left behind on vehicles, traffic environments and road conditions, communication to and from the vehicle, including mobile phone reception, medical conditions of children, including asthma, allergies, and anaphylaxis, You have first aid provision and management of illness, injuries, and emergencies. External events like traffic incidences, crashes, extreme weather or natural disasters. Environmental hazards such as temperature extremes, pollution or smoke. And child safe practices, including children being exposed to people out in public. So there are some other risk factors to consider when we transport children. So now we haven't identified the common risk factors, we also need to assess the hazards that are associated with the paths or the routes that we might take when transporting children. So to do this, we need to conduct a risk assessment. So risk assessments will be carried out before authorization of any transportation is requested. So the risk assessment will identify and assess risks that the transportation may pose to the safety, health and well-being of children and outline steps to manage and minimize these. There are many risk factors that we need to consider prior to transporting children and ensure that all regulatory requirements are met. So next we're going to look at a sample risk assessment and work through a scenario to complete the risk assessment together. So here's a sample that I've taken from the ASEQA website. They have so many useful templates and that you can use. And this is a perfect one that you can use in your family daycare. I think it's important to note, though, that your risk assessment should be contextualized to your service and the children in your care. So some things to consider are requirements for seatbelts, safety restraints under New South Wales road rules. You need to consider water hazards. So if you're walking to and from your service, do you pass any lakes? Do you pass any rivers? Do you pass a dam? You need to consider the number of adults and children involved in transportation, given the risk posed by transportation, so the number of educators or the other responsible adults who's appropriate to provide the supervision, and whether any adults with specialised skills are required. So we also need to look at what equipment you need to consider. So that, of course, is your mobile phone, your emergency contacts for the children being transported, the process for entering and exiting your service and the pickup location or destination, and procedures for embarking and disembarking on this mean of transport. So this also includes how each child is accounted for on embarking and disembarking, and we're going to go into that in more detail later. So here I'll just run through it quickly, so we've just so you can see what it is and what it looks like. There you can see the checklist, so the first aid kit, contact information, mobile, medication and health plans, and then who made the risk assessment, signatures, etc. Now, down the bottom, you can see their risk assessment to be evaluated and reviewed on. So it says a risk assessment must be undertaken each time the service transports or arranges the transport of children, and it refers to the National Regulation 102E and 102F. Now, these only apply to centre-based services. However, it is best practice, and we would recommend adhering to these requirements. And I've just popped my head into the chat and I can see April has also mentioned take an EpiPen. Absolutely. Now let's look at a scenario together, and let's consider this scenario and work through a risk matrix as a group. So in the coming weeks, you will be taking 4 children on an excursion to the local gardens where a play for the Very Hungry Caterpillar will be performed. You will be walking to the garden and the entrance gates are on a very busy road with traffic lights. So I'm going to open a poll. And can you share your answers in the chat? I want you to consider what risks would you consider? So in the chat, reading this scenario, what risks would you consider on this excursion? And I'm going to give you guys about 30 seconds to a minute to have a think. Yep, so Rowena said car incident. There was parking distance to venue, traffic volume and weather. Traffic, absolutely. Children can trip and fall, definitely. One just flew by quickly, but I think it said poisons in the garden relating to the plants and flowers that may be around. Someone said bee stings, absolutely, especially if that can cause an anaphylactic reaction. Yep, dogs and other people and strangers. Yep, I think you've covered it all. There's another, I have a few suggested possible answers here. So we've also got getting lost. So as the group will be walking to the garden, there's a possibility that some children might wander off or get lost. You run the risk of sunburn and dehydration. So depending on the weather, there may be a risk while walking to and from the garden. So educators will need to ensure that children are wearing hats, they have sunscreen, and they have access to water. You've mentioned this before, but health issues, of course. Someone mentioned bees, which I said could potentially be an anaphylactic or allergy, could cause an anaphylactic or allergy reaction, could trigger something worse. Strangers, which we've also mentioned, and unfamiliar environment. So the garden may be unfamiliar and increase the likelihood of accidents and injuries. So I want to use the example of a child getting lost in our next matrix. There we go. So let's have a look. Let's dissect this sample risk matrix. So this is also taken from a CEQA, and it's going to give you a risk outcome. So if you can see on the left side, it says likelihood. So starting from the bottom, likelihood, it goes rare, unlikely, possible, likely, almost certain. So let's consider a lost child. What is the likelihood of a child getting lost in your care? So you obviously, when you're doing this risk matrix, it needs to apply to you, your service, and your children. So what you might consider is the age of your children. So, you know, a 4-year-old has more of an understanding of protective behaviours than, say, a 2-year-old would. You perhaps need to consider your ratios. So then we move up to consequences on the top. We've got insignificant, which if it were to happen, there would be it would be an insignificant. There would be no cause for alarm. Then we have minor, moderate, major, and catastrophic. Catastrophic obviously being death. Now, I'd like to put to the chat what your opinions are on a lost child on this excursion and how you would fill in your risk matrix. So what likelihood would you think and what consequence would you think? And then let's try and match up an answer. So we've got, so let's start with likelihood. So likelihood is rare. So like I said, this should be applicable to your own family daycare service. So let's say, for example, these are 4-year-olds, they go to the park often and they know how to hold hands and stay close. However, They haven't been to a park this busy before. So let's call that possible. So it's not likely, but it's possible. And now let's look at the consequence. So if that were to happen, it would be, I would say, major to catastrophic, perhaps not catastrophic, let's go major. Now, if you match up possible and major, in the big orange box, it says high. Now, to me, that would be high risk, and I would consider the excursion. So what changes would you need to make? I would potentially look at, because I wouldn't want to take a child on a high risk excursion, I'd potentially look at increasing ratio. So perhaps instead of 1 to 4, you might have 1 to 2. I would consider perhaps going on a different excursion, maybe to a park that's not so busy, and just try and eliminate that risk. Now, let's look at how we would respond in the event of a child being unaccounted for during an excursion. So if unfortunately this were to happen, these are the steps that you should take. And I want to also note that it's best practice that these steps that we're about to go through should be a part of your procedure. So this should be in your excursion or your safe transportation policy, so that every educator who has access to your policy is aware of this procedure. So let's have a look. In this case, an educator will immediately, so if you're working with another educator, inform them, ask them to provide supervision for the group and reassure the children. You would conduct a head count. You could ask children, parent helpers or other educators if they've seen the missing child. You, of course, will search the premises, check organised meeting points. So use your mobile phone to contact other educators, alert the venue management and request that an announcement is made. If the child is still unaccounted for after checking all of the above, contact the police on 000 and report the incident. You'd contact parents or their guardian to inform them of the situation, and the approved provider must make a notification to the regulatory authority within 24 hours of a serious incident. So just before I move on, I just want to check in how everyone's going, and if anyone needs, has any comments or questions before we move on. Yep. All good. Wonderful. Yep. Okay, so now we're moving into risk management. So now that we've identified some examples of risks, we need to talk. Sorry, I'm having a laugh. I just saw the chat. Someone's like, I'm hungry. It'll be dinner time soon. Feel free to have a snack while we're going. So now that we've identified some example risks, we need to look at how to manage them. So approved providers, nominated supervisors and family daycare coordinators need to take specific steps to minimise this risk. So to ensure the safety and health and well-being of children during our periods of transportation. So earlier I mentioned on March 1st that the requirements did change, and those changes, of course, were centre-based. However, as we said earlier, it is good practice for family daycare coordinators, nominated supervisors, and all educators to be aware. And one way to support this is by using a set of procedures for daily risk identification and management. So this can help you identify, assess, and manage the risk of harm. So that's including minimising the risk of children being left in vehicles or being transported. So again, this was taken from the ASIPA website, and this is their Safe Transportation of Children Safety Checklist. And so I just want to show this to you and quickly go through it. I'm not going to go into much detail, but this is a living document. So it should be constantly updated, constantly amended as changes happen. So therefore, what you need to do is have regular reviews on these documents. So if you regularly transport children, you can consider how often you want to do that. And of course, when regs or laws change, this needs to be updated as well. And like the risk assessment sample we looked at earlier, this should also be contextualized to your service. So to begin using the checklist and transport record form, discuss with your coordinator and determine the procedures required to minimize the risk each time a child is transported. Adapt the documents to be relevant to your home. And that's also relevant to the nature of the transportation and the number of trips to be taken. Make the documents available each time children are transported. Build information about this tool into induction programs, service manuals, and policies and procedures to embed this important aspect of risk management practice into your service operations. So as family daycare educators, you must understand your responsibility by completing this tool each time you are transporting a child. And now let's look at what this sample has on their safety checklist. So some things that you would include are any changes to the route to be taken, notified to the nominated supervisor or responsible person. You have packed an up-to-date attendance list. Current authorizations allowing the children to be transported are, of course, signed by parents or carers, and up-to-date information about each child's pickup and drop-off and location is made apparent. So here we go. Other things you can consider is you'll tick off if your first aid is packed, once your mobile phone is packed. Educator has current first aid, emergency asthma, anaphylaxis training. Your ratios are correct. Each child is signed in upon embarking, and the regular transportation record form completed immediately after all children have embarked. Then, of course, it gets signed off. And now we're into authorization for transport of children. So we've mentioned this a few times tonight, and that's obviously the form that parents sign. So in this safety checklist that we just looked at, one of the important points was current authorization allowing child to be transported. So that, of course, is the written consent. The written consent for transport and excursions are important because they clarify the expectations and processes for all parties. They contain the necessary details to allow families to provide informed authorization. And they provide formal authorizations for families to transport children outside of your service premises. So, of course, what that means is in these authorized notifications, they're very specific. They have the date, the time, how many children are involved, how many adults are involved, emergency contact numbers for the adults involved. And that is why it's important for the families to be informed before they sign off, just so they're aware. Now let's look at examples of transportation other than as part of an excursion. So that looks like the drop-off and pick-up of children from schools, or if you're picking up or dropping off children from their homes. So a family daycare educator might drive 3 children in her care each afternoon to pick up her own 2 children. And a family daycare educator can give care to school-aged children and younger children. So the educator does the school drop-off and the pickup for the children using her car. So the younger children accompany the educator on these school runs. So in this scenario, the educator must consider both the school children and the younger children in the transport risk assessment and obtain authorizations for both the school-age children and the younger children. Now we're going to look at a sample transportation authorization form, which comes from the Kids and Traffic website. So of course it has the child's name, the reason they're being transported, a description of where they're going. So this might be for regular transportation or the date. So if it's for another reason, the means of transport. So a few of you mentioned you use vans and minibuses and cars. The period of time when the child will be transported. So are you going out of service for an hour? Are you going to be out of service for 30 minutes? Is it just down the road? You would need to fill in the expected number of children likely to be transported, plus including how many staff and other adults that may be there when supervising, any legal requirements for seatbelts or safety restraints, confirmation that a risk assessment has been prepared and is available at the service, and confirmation that written policies and procedures for transporting children are also available at the service. So now we're going to have a look at authorization for excursions. So each time a family daycare educator takes a child out of the family daycare residence or out of the approved family daycare venue, they will need to consider whether the excursion is a regular outing. So written authorizations must be obtained prior to an excursion from a parent or other person with authority to authorize taking the child outside the family daycare residence or approved venue. So of course, an example of an excursion is an outing to the local park. We've mentioned the library. Perhaps you go to the movies, or it could be an indoor activity such as rock climbing or bowling. And here is a scenario that involves both an excursion and transportation that is not part of an excursion. So in this example, our family daycare educator provides care to both school-age children and younger children. On Tuesday mornings, the educator drives to school to drop off the school children, but then continues on to the library with the younger children. So because in this scenario, both older children and younger children are involved in this transportation, there needs to be two sets of authorizations. So for the older children, the authorizations would be your safe transport, your regular safe transport authorization, whereas for the younger children who go to the library, that would be your excursion authorization. So you would have two sets of documents to comply with these regulations. So here is an example of an excursion authorization form. So very similar to the safe transport, the regular transport outing one. But this one also includes the reason the child is being taken out of the premises, date the child is being taken on the excursion, description of where they're going, how they're getting there, what they're going to do when they get to this excursion, how long they're going to be away from the premises. So does this excursion last for 30 minutes or does this excursion last for 4 hours? Who will be attending the excursion? So that's both children and adults. What the ratio is, and if any volunteers are going to be joining you to supervise. And of course, at the end, the confirmation that the risk assessment has been prepared and available at the service is clear. Now, let's talk about what your roles and responsibilities are as approved providers and as nominated supervisors and as educators. So we want to clarify what the responsibilities and expectations are for people who do hold these different positions in your service. Whose responsibility is it to document them? Whose responsibility is it to get the parents to sign the forms? So one of the most common occasions we see the transportation of children in family daycares is, of course, during excursions. And we should be looking at your excursion policies and procedure guidelines. And as I said before, they should also hold a clear expectation of this. All educators should receive a practical induction and regular practical training relating to the transportation of children. And it is important that these processes and procedures are rehearsed regularly. So it is every approved provider and educator's responsibility to ensure children in their care are not left unattended in vehicles and are accounted for at all times. So let's have a look. I'm going to break it down into 4 different parts. So here, let's start with the approved provider. What is your responsibility as an approved provider? So you need to ensure that national law and regs are met. Risk assessments are complete. Every child has an authorization form to leave the service. Ratios are always maintained. Volunteers are not left alone with children. Ensure all policies and procedures are being followed. Ensure copies of the policies and procedures are readily accessible. And notify families of changes to policies or procedures. I think it's also important to note that it is the legal responsibility of approved providers to ensure systems are in place to minimize the risk and ensure that health and safety procedures are implemented by the responsible people in the family daycare environments. So ultimate responsibility, of course, lies with the approved provider to ensure their services are meeting the requirements under the Education and Care Services national law. Now let's look at the role of the nominated supervisor. So that is to conduct the risk assessment, to ensure that all risks are managed, ensure a new risk assessment is completed when circumstances change for regular outings. Every child has an authorization form to leave the service. Ensure volunteers understand the details of the excursion, their expectations and their supervision responsibilities. And all the required equipment and items are taken on the excursion. So that's the role of the nominated supervisor. Next, we're going to have a look at the role and responsibilities of the educator. So ensure that the excursion is carried out in line with services excursion policy and procedures. The educator must ensure that all children attending the excursion have their written authorization from families to attend prior to the excursion going ahead. They conduct a risk assessment for an excursion, so ensuring any risks are managed. Ensure a new risk assessment is completed when circumstances change for regular outings. Ensure the required educator to child ratios are in place and children are supervised at all times. Undertake regular attendance checks to account for all children. So that, of course, will be regular head counts. And not just that, that can also include visually looking at your children and marking off their names. And of course, ensure family members and volunteers attending understand their expectations and are not left alone with any of the children, and ensure all children's health and medical needs are taken on the excursion. So that includes your first aid, any personal medication, and medical management plans. Now, what are the roles and responsibilities of your families? So their responsibility is to sign the authorization form. Families have a clear understanding of what is involved in the excursion. If volunteering, they understand the details and expectations of the excursion. and ensure required medication for their child is in date and taken on the excursion. Before we move on to our interview, I'd just like to pause and check in and see how everyone's going. If anyone has any comments or questions about that, the roles and responsibilities. Okay, so now we have an interview to watch. This interview is with Louise Cosgrove.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Elizabeth, and I'm coming to you from the home of the Gadigal and Wangal people. And I'm very happy to introduce today with us Louise Cosgrove, who is the team leader with Kids in Traffic, and they are the New South Wales Early Childhood Road Safety Education Program. Welcome, Louise.
Hi, Elizabeth. Thanks for having me join you today. I'm joining you from the lands of the Wallamadigal clan of the Darug Nation, and I'm here at the beautiful Wallamadigal campus of Macquarie University today.
Fantastic. Well, thank you again so much for joining us. Louise, can you tell us a bit about Kids in Traffic and how your organisation supports family daycare educators?
Yep. Sure. So Kids in Traffic is funded by Transport for New South Wales, and we're delivered in partnership with Macquarie University. We deliver a range of free road safety education workshops for early childhood educators throughout New South Wales. And we also provide resources, advice and support to help educators address local road safety issues, and also to include road safety education as an ongoing part of their program. We certainly understand that family daycare educators are often out and about with children, so the protective practices of educators are particularly important to ensure children's safety. Educators can take a look at our Kids in Traffic website for more information about our workshops, and they can book in there as well, and they can also see the range of road safety education resources that we provide.
Great. Yes, I have had a look and there are some fantastic resources there. So that's great. And Louise, what are some key messages or practices that we can share and implement with children to ensure that they're keeping safe when they're in and around vehicles?
So we do have our Kids in Traffic key road safety messages, and these messages have been designed for adults to use with young children as they travel together, as passengers, out and about as pedestrians, and also when they're playing and riding. So family daycare educators are ideally placed to share these messages with children during their everyday experiences like dramatic play, music, story times, arrivals and departures, transition times, and also their discussions with children. And also while they're out and about on excursions or when they're transporting children. And then educators are also really well placed to share these messages with families for them to use when they're out and about with their children too. So as young children don't yet have the skills and understandings needed to keep themselves safe, it's really crucial for the adults to take responsibility for their safety. So although adults will take that responsibility, we can still really engage children in actively understanding these road safety messages, and they do have agency in learning about how to be safe in and around vehicles without actually having that responsibility to keep themselves safe. So our messages are simple, they're clear, they're based on identifying positive safety behaviours. So for children as pedestrians, we simply say, always hold a grown-up's hand. When a grown-up's hand's not available, hold on to a pram, bag or clothes, and always cross the road with the grown-up. So the key here is really to maintain physical contact and close proximity to children when we're out and about walking with them. For children as passengers, our key message is always buckle up safely. And this will look different depending on the age and size of the child. So it's important educators are aware of not only child restraint legislation, but also best practice to optimally protect children in vehicles. The next message, always stay buckled up, awake or asleep. And also no matter how long or short the journey is. So sometimes when families are travelling close to home at lower speeds, they might take risks like allowing children to sit in the front seat or travelling without a car seat or a booster seat. Another passenger message we have is always get in and out of the safety door. So the safety door is the rear curbside or footpath side door of the vehicle, and that's usually the safest way to enter and exit. And then for children, when they're playing, we say always ask a grown-up where it's safe for you to play. And play spaces that are fenced, that are away from vehicles and from water are always a good option. And then always wear your helmet when riding your bike or your wheeled toy. So it's great if we can start that helmet wearing from a young age when children do get that first bike or wheeled toy.
Fantastic. Yeah, they're really good messages. And we know that between October 2020 and March 2023, new requirements were introduced under the Early Childhood Education and Care laws and regulations around transport provided or arranged by a service. So are there any key messages or improved practices that family daycare educators or providers can implement from these updates?
Yeah, there certainly have been some changes over the last few years, and the requirements that have been introduced certainly aim to address the increased risk of harm when educators transport children as part of service provision. So certainly risks arise when children aren't restrained in the best way for their age and size, when car seats haven't been fitted into the vehicle correctly, or also when children aren't buckled up properly. So when transporting children in vehicles, it's really important to remember we can't control what happens outside of the vehicle. We can only control what happens inside. So it's really important that we take steps to make sure children are restrained in the safest way possible on every journey. There are also some other key risks with when transporting children. The risk that a child can be unaccounted for. So that might be that they're not at the collection point for after school care pickup perhaps, or that they're unaccounted for at an excursion venue. So definitely transitioning from one location to another obviously carries greater risk for a child to be unaccounted for. There's also a risk very clearly that a child could be injured or harmed when we're transporting them. So this might happen while we're in the vehicle, when we're embarking or disembarking, and also during transition between the vehicle and the family daycare premises or other location. But these times of key risk are also not mutually exclusive, and sadly we know there have been cases where a child who is unaccounted for has been injured or harmed as a result of being left in a vehicle. So we really do need to take these risks and our risk mitigation strategies very seriously. So when educators and schemes provide or arrange for the transportation of children, it's crucial to ensure compliance with all of these regulatory requirements and that we have policies, procedures and practices in place to ensure the health, safety and well-being of children. So engaging with all relevant stakeholders, whether it be scheme staff, other educators and families, excursion venues or other third parties, is absolutely critical at the planning or review stage. So each stakeholder will bring their own viewpoint and it can provide a different lens to view policies and procedures through. So for this reason, it's really important to make sure that family daycare educators, who are the end users of the documents, have input into their formation as well. So we know each family daycare scheme should have a process in place for educators to become familiar with policies, procedures and risk assessments. Induction and ongoing education and training should be provided for educators along the way. So it's not only important for educators to understand transport and excursion policies and procedures, but also, most crucially, to be clear as to how these translate into practice. Completing risk assessments and obtaining authorisations and recording children's attendance at certain points of the transport process can be tedious, but these administration tasks, if completed thoroughly, not only help to protect children, but they also help to protect family daycare educators if something does go wrong. So Kids and Traffic have worked with Department of Education to develop a series of template samples and explanatory documents in our Safe Transport Toolkit. And we've worked closely with them over the last few years to do that, to reflect those changes to regulations. And we highly recommend that family day carers visit the Kids and Traffic website and check these documents out.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Louise. That's a really good overview of what family daycare educators and service providers can be doing. So that's great. And we understand family daycare educators should plan for continuous road safety education. So what might that look like for a family daycare educator embedding road safety education into their programs?
So children and families travel each day to get to and from family daycare. So arrivals and departures and transitions can be really key times to talk about how children keep safe on those journeys. There are so many opportunities for spontaneous teachable moments, along with those chances that we have for more planned road safety programming throughout the day. But the most important thing is to ensure that road safety teaching and learning experiences are relevant and meaningful to children's real lives. So if educators are observing arrivals and departures, they do get a chance to see where children are at risk. Are families buckling children up in the safest way? Are they using the safety door? Are they holding children's hands? So once educators determine important areas of focus, they can plan for these ongoing teaching and learning experiences to address behaviour that puts children at risk. The great thing about early childhood road safety education is that it completely can go cross curriculum. So we can implement it through music, drama, literacy, numeracy, technology, creative arts. There are so many possibilities. Too many to cover today in our conversation. So again, I would encourage educators to come along to our free workshops to learn more about road safety education programming, or they can also organise an online or face-to-face workshop for their scheme staff and other educators as well.
Sounds great. Great. So lastly, Louise, how can family daycare educators work together in partnership with families to ensure that all those road safety practices that you've spoken about today are consistent and then continued in the home environments by the families?
So keeping children safe is a very unifying goal. So educators and families can work on that together. Instead of noting and highlighting families' unsafe practices, it's really important to focus on giving attention to all the safe behaviours that educators observe too. So something like taking photos of adults holding children's hands at arrival and departures is actually a really great place to start. Then educators can use these photos to make displays, posters or books to highlight pedestrian safety. Orientation and enrolment can also be a really good time to talk with families about road safety. So educators might find out how families will be travelling to and from family daycare, how many children are in the family, who'll be dropping off and picking up, and things like that. And then educators can certainly let families know what their expectations are at arrival and departure times to ensure children are kept safe too. When educators include road safety education stories, songs, or other activities in their program, they can share those with families through their daily documentation and conversations at the end of the day. So another idea also might be to have a road safety sharing bag that includes information for families, might have some storybooks and a scrapbook that children and families can record how they keep safe when they're out and about in the community too. So they could include drawings or photos and certainly words of how they keep safe. But it's really about ensuring two-way communication and supporting families to keep children safe whenever they're out and about.
Wow. Well, thank you so much, Louise. You've given us so much to think about and some really great information. So thank you so much for your time today. And we look forward to chatting with you again soon.
Thanks, Elizabeth.
So I think Louise made some really excellent points there that we're actually going to touch on a little bit further on in this webinar tonight. So things like helmets, pedestrian safety, and guidelines for safe transport and travel, which is where we are now. So when walking to and from the vehicle, embarking and disembarking. So of course that means getting out of your vehicle and getting back in. What are some things, some safety things we need to consider? So when we're with children, we need to use marked crossings. So marked crossings might be a zebra crossing, lights. It could also be if you're at the school, you know, the little lollipop person, and it has a big orange sign that says crossing. That's what we mean by when we use the mark crossing. And of course, we should be role modeling. So we should always be crossing at the right points and showing children where. So when we're getting in and out of the car, position yourself to best assist a child. So obviously the older children get, the more capable they are. Our positions should be to protect them while getting in and out. Talk about traffic with children. So of course, you can talk about things that you do together, like holding hands or staying close to an adult, looking and listening for vehicles around, and as mentioned earlier, using safe places to cross. Check that all children have left the vehicle. So again, this is about ensuring that no children are left in cars. Hold children's hands and supervise them. Avoid walking near other vehicles. And I think just to highlight the importance, this one is underlined, checking the vehicle to ensure no children remain inside. So we're going to talk a little bit more about that in a minute. Now let's look at guidelines for safe transport and travel prior to children getting into the vehicle. So what that looks like is that prior to us transporting children, we ensure that the child restraints, booster seats and vehicle are fitted correctly in the vehicle and they are in good working order. We know the history of the child restraints and the boosters being used, and we conduct a driver and vehicle check. So what a vehicle and driver check means is that anyone driving a vehicle to transport children must have and carry a valid current driver's license correct for their vehicle class. So the driver must be alcohol and drug free before and while driving the vehicle. Vehicle conditions should be periodically checked with attention given to tyre pressure, brakes, lights, indicators, windscreen wipers, and air conditioning. And now we're going to look at pedestrian safety. So of course, the best way to keep young children safe from traffic injuries is to hold their hand or hold them close. So by holding onto children, you can stop them from running into dangerous situations. Even though children may complain about holding hands, by making rules about safe walking and explaining to them and reinforcing safe behaviours, children will be able to learn how to become safer pedestrians. As we heard Louise mention, when children are young, the responsibility still falls on us as adults to keep children safe around roads and vehicles. However, we can certainly start engaging children in conversations around road safety and how to keep them safe. So I want to pose this question to you all. And the question is, what can we teach children about pedestrian safety? So please use the chat box and feel free to share your answers. Yeah. Oh, excellent input from Robin, who said walking ropes are great also. Absolutely. And they're excellent to use during emergency evacuations as well. That's really good practice. There's teaching children how to cross the road. Yep. Signs and traffic lights. Looking both ways. Listen with your ears and always hold your hands. Yeah. Stop, look and listen. Perfect. I have some other examples here, which I might share with you. So what can we teach children about pedestrian safety? We can teach them that whenever we are out walking, we hold hands. If we can't hold hands, you can keep close by holding on to me, the bag or the stroller. There's no running ahead. Where we could look at where it's safe to cross and walk along the road. Teach them what to look for, teach them what to listen for, and the need to stop and wait at the side of the road before crossing. The need to keep checking until they are safe and off the road and off the driveway. And of course, always using a sidewalk. Stop, look, listen, and think. Has anyone heard this slogan before? So this is bringing me back to childhood. I remember stop, look, listen. However, when I was a child, there was no think. So think is new, and think is consider whether it is safe to cross. So let's have a look at this. So the simple saying has been used across the globe to teach young children the importance of road safety. So before you cross the street, you should stop. So take one step back from the curb. Look, so that's continuously looking both ways. Listen, so paying close attention to the sounds of the approaching vehicles. And think, which is consider whether it's safe to cross. Then and only then should you cross the road. Now, there are many different ways we can practice pedestrian safety with children. When you walk with children in your care, you can talk about safe behaviours. Always demonstrate correct pedestrian behaviour. And the best way you can help your child to be safe is to talk with them and teach them about being alert on the road. Always hold the child's hand. Explain why the place you have chosen is the safest place to walk. Point out dangers such as vehicles coming out of driveways. Use pedestrian crossings and lights correctly. Teach children to keep turning their heads in both directions to look and listen for traffic as they cross the road. Talk with them about everything they need to think about to keep safe when walking. Explain why they should look before crossing the driveway, road, or car park. And talk to children and reinforce stop, look, listen, and think. So every time you cross the road together. So we touched briefly on this earlier when we spoke about children being left in school buses and sadly children being left in cars. So this is either intentionally or unintentionally, and both can occur. So the main risk for children being left unattended in cars is heat. Children can suffer life-threatening heat stroke, rapid dehydration, suffocation, and death. And this is because cars can get very hot very quickly. So let's think about a typical summer Australian day where temperatures can reach 30 degrees. A temperature in a parked car can reach 40 degrees while it's outside. So if a car's at 40 degrees, on a 30-degree day, the temperature inside the car could be as high as 70 degrees. So when cars are parked, it takes less than 5 minutes for them to heat to temperatures that can seriously harm children. Cars can heat to dangerous or fatal levels, even on cool or overcast days, or when they're parked in the shade. The younger children are more sensitive to heat stroke and they dehydrate faster. So sometimes children are accidentally left in cars when parents or carers forget that that child is in the back seat. And sometimes they're locked in. So here are some ways to prevent this from happening. So of course, don't let children play with your keys. Make sure your keys are out of their reach. Always keep your keys with you to prevent them getting locked in the car. So perhaps a way you could carry your keys is around a lanyard on your neck. New cars often have self-locking features, so wind windows down before putting the children in the car in case the car automatically locks. Talk to children about not playing with the buttons inside the car. Always keep your car locked when you're not in the car, so children in your car don't get in on their own. And if you can't find a child, always check the car in case the child is hiding. Now, leaving children in your car can be dangerous for other reasons too. For example, your child could release themselves from their seat and they could leave the car and get onto the road. They could accidentally disengage the handbrake, causing it to roll forward or backwards. They could choke on food or a toy or other objects within their reach. They could play with the windows and get their limb or neck caught, or they could be involved in a car crash. They could be a victim to a break-in, or they could accidentally lock you out of the car. So these are all things that we need to consider and not leave children in cars at all for no reason, for absolutely no reason. Now, we've talked about various ways to ensure safety. So we've talked about pedestrian safety, supervision, travel, and car safety. But I think it's also important for us to talk about driveway safety, especially as family daycare operators. You perhaps, your home might have a big driveway. So this might be important and very relevant to you. So driveway incidences are becoming increasingly common as children are unpredictable. They're quite naturally inquisitive, and they can be really quick and mobile. So their small size, together with large blind spots in most cars, means that children standing or stepping behind a vehicle can often not be seen. So even if the vehicle is fitted with the parking sensors and your reverse cameras, children still may not be noticed until it's too late. So there are 3 steps that can make all the difference. So we've got number 1, supervise, number 2, separate, and number 3, see. So supervise. At pickup and drop-off times, you may have families using your driveway. So to ensure that all the children in your care are kept well and away from vehicles arriving and leaving. The area should be used by cars and securely gated so that no children cannot access them. Separate. So treat the driveway like a road. Do not let children use the driveway as a play area. Separate children's play spaces from the garage and from the driveway. So some design features can prevent children from accessing the driveway, which include fitting high handles to garage doors, fences separating the house and the garden from the driveway, and self-closing doors and gates. I'm going to mention that on farms, in addition to providing a barrier between the farmhouse and the driveway, a second inaccessible driveway can be built for farm vehicles. And then lastly, we're going to get to see. So all vehicles have blind spots. Reversing sensors and cameras can assist with reducing these blind spots. However, when they are used, it can still be difficult to notice a young child until it's too late. So it's important not to become complacent and rely solely on these devices. There is no adequate replacement for active supervision than there is of an adult. And drivers should get into the habit of walking around their vehicle before getting into it and leaving an area when a young child is present. So you can always provide guidance to your families on what their responsibilities are when dropping off and picking up. So there we have supervise, separate, and see. So I'm curious to know if any family daycare educators here tonight use bicycles, scooters, or skateboards as a form of transport. So just quick answer in the chat box if you do. So I'm seeing a lot of no's. No? No? All right. Probably for the best. However, you know, I am going to take you through the safeguards to that. And this also applies when you're not necessarily using bikes and scooters and skateboards as a form of transport, but it also applies when you're using them perhaps in the park, maybe in your own homes. This is all still relevant and teaches children best practice as well. So let's have a look. It says here, ensure bicycle, scooter, and skateboard is suitable for the child's age, size, and ability. Always wear a helmet. So as we know, Louise just said, helmets are compulsory for all children and adults when riding a bike in all Australian states and territories, and when riding scooters, skateboards, and rollerblades in some states. Of course, use protective gear like wrist guards and elbow pads. Dress children in brightly coloured clothes. This helps riders, pedestrians, and drivers see the child. Teach the child to look carefully at the riding environment and decide whether it's safe to ride, and give the children some practice in a safe area. So for example, your backyard or a park before heading to the bike path or footpath. So here's a little diagram on how to choose a helmet. As we mentioned, in all Australian states and territories, helmets are compulsory for riding. And in some states and territories, they're also compulsory for riding skateboards, scooters, and rollerblades. So wearing a helmet is always recommended when your child is riding any wheeled device, even if it isn't required by law. A helmet is an essential part of protecting your child against serious head injuries. So here are some tips on finding the safest helmet for bikes and scooters. So you need to make sure that your helmet matches the Australian New Zealand standard. So look for the Australian standards label. The helmet should sit about 2 fingers above the child's eyebrows. You can do the push test. So you make sure that the helmet is snugly fit. And the sliders should be adjusted so that the strap comes together to form a V at the base of the children's ears. And you can use the 1 finger test. Can I fit just 1 finger between the chin and the strap? And like a car seat check, we need to make sure the helmet isn't damaged. For example, check there are no cracks and that the foam liner is intact. Don't buy a second-hand helmet. There's no way of knowing if the previous owner has damaged it in an accident, and always replace the helmet after impact. So they're just a few tips that you can use when choosing helmets for your children. Perhaps you'd even want to pass this on to your families. Now, we also heard Louise talk about the safety door, and this is another great initiative from the Kids Safe Traffic. This sticker is available on their website under free resources. And this sticker was designed to be placed on the rear passenger side door of the car. And it's a really good visual to remind children and educators that this is the safest door to use when getting in and out of a car. So the rules around the safety door are: never allow a child to get in and out of the car on the traffic side. Children should remain in the car until an adult opens the safety door. Make sure all passengers are securely buckled into their car seat, booster seat, or seatbelt before you start the car. Never leave a child at any age in a vehicle without adult supervision. And help them learn passenger safety messages by using and sharing them whenever you are out and about in the car. And I have just a few other points here that we should be remembering, and that's always to help a child buckle up, make sure their seatbelt is not twisted, never leave a child of any age unattended, and of course, keep your car keys and remote controls away from children playing with the car controls, which can be dangerous. So when I asked you earlier if anyone uses other forms of transport, we had one response that said van, but does anyone here tonight use a minivan in their service? Oh, Fatima does. Wonderful. So Fatima, this will relate to you. And this is important also for other family daycare educators who perhaps in the future may hire a minibus, potentially for excursions or, yeah, oh, a few coming through that you use a minibus. Wonderful. All right, so this will be applicable for you guys. So of course, we've talked about attendance records quite a lot tonight. So we need to make sure that your services, policies and procedures maintain accurate and up-to-date attendance record keeping. So this is when you drop off children, you're actively seeing the child and checking them off. And that's the same as when they're getting on and off the bus. And this is a procedure, that you should be rehearsing often. And in these record keeping times, so when you are marking this role, it's not just when your child gets on and off the bus, it should be regularly. And as Louise mentioned, it is a lot of admin, but our goal is to keep children safe. We also need to consider restraints. So children are strapped in accordingly and correctly to policy and procedure. They are in age-appropriate car seats and boosters, and they should still be used in a minibus. So that those restraints still apply. As I mentioned, do a roll check and a head count. And when we're doing that, we're also thoroughly checking the vehicle. So that means physically inspecting the vehicle to make sure that all children have exited, including checking under the seats and in the luggage racks and in the storage areas. Now it says here, do another roll check and head count. So that highlights to me the importance of this process in transporting children in a minibus. So once the children are at the destination or in the family daycare home, conduct another roll check and head count to ensure all children are accounted for. This is good practice, which you should always be doing when you practice your emergency drills and evacuations. And of course, check the vehicle again. If possible, have a second person physically check the vehicle, including checking under the seats, in the luggage rack, and in the storage areas. If there is a child unaccounted for, immediately make any necessary inquiries to establish the child's whereabouts. You'll need to conduct physical searches of the home, and if necessary, contact the child's family and/or police. And there must be at least one person with first aid, asthma, and anaphylaxis training in attendance during transportation. So some family daycare educators may have children arriving before and after school, so either on a private bus or perhaps public transport. If this is the case, your service must implement safe transportation requirements and practices at all times to prevent serious incidents and ensure the health and safety and well-being of children. There is significant risk of critical injury to a child left on a vehicle or bus for a lengthy period of time. Here are some ways to ensure supervision and safety while transporting children. So of course you have robust policies and procedures for your specific service. So your transport policy and procedures must be specific to your family daycare and address the unique circumstances and factors in your service's transportation process. So when I showed you that template earlier and I said, this is just a template, you need to contextualize it to your own service. So not one policy can be a blanket policy. It needs to be specific to you and what you do. We need to consider adequate supervision during transportation. So educator to child ratios apply at all times and across all locations, as long as that service is operating. So this includes during excursions and any transport provided. And services must consider additional safety requirements. So of course, this includes your first aid, asthma, anaphylaxis, trained staff, and supervision during embarking and disembarking procedures. So let's look at safety while transporting children. While private transport arrangements do not form part of your service, to ensure the safety of children, the regulatory authority strongly recommends your service implement policies and procedures relating to procedures in place for receiving and accounting for children arriving at your service, the process and responsibilities relating to signing in children as being in attendance, working with families and third parties to ensure children are safe and accounted for at every step of the transport process, and your services process if a child does not arrive from a private transport arrangement. So that means what that last point means, what is in place if that child doesn't arrive to your service. So were there any messages from their school? Were there any messages from their parents? So this is something you need to embed into your own personal culture. So if this is something that you do, you need to make that clear distinction with your families that if they're not attending school today, I'm involved in that process of notification. So that family needs to perhaps text you by a certain time that that child's not at school today so that you are aware. So that's something you need to embed in your own service culture. So now we're coming to the end of today's webinar, and I just wanted to quickly touch on public transport safety. So a few of you mentioned that you do use trains, buses, etc. So I just want to go through some safety measures, particularly if you're using prams or you're with young children on trains. So of course, when on trains, strap your child in securely and hold on to your pram. So of course, that means putting on the pram brake, making sure your pram is parallel parked to the edge of the platform. So stand behind the line on the platforms, board the train in front. And I know that if you board near the station master, they'll often get out the ramp if you need to. So feel free to use that. And of course, when on the train, stay seated, keep children close. Please don't let them run around and swing off the rails. Just teaching them good habits. So as we all come from all over New South Wales, I should mention that regional trains have the same safety rules. However, on regional trains, baby strollers, prams and capsules are classed as hand luggage. So that means that you'll be required to fold them up and store them in the appropriate area. So each regional train has a fold down baby change table and onboard staff can show you where it is. If you're using bus services, you may be aware that some buses can be lowered by the driver. So they are close to the curb. So if needed, the bus driver can also extend the accessible ramp to help passengers board the bus. Accessible buses have specific accessible areas for prams and wheelchairs, and that's near the front of the bus. So when you get on the bus, there's a little sign there and it shows you that your pram must be parked facing the back of the bus and your handbrake must be on. And of course, when traveling with young children, the same rules apply as when you are on a train. Remain seated at all times, brakes on, and just teaching them positive habits on public transport. And now lastly, I want to touch on the light rail services. So these can be a great day out for children. And if you've seen the light rail before, you'll notice some things like they don't have a platform and you need to cross the tracks where the light rail runs. So it's slightly, I would say, more dangerous than others, which means we need to be a bit more careful when around light rails. So what that means is if you are near a light rail with a pram or a stroller, be careful which direction you're walking in. If you can see from the photo, their rails are in the ground and sometimes pram wheels can get stuck in those ridges, so steer clear. The other thing I want to bring to your attention is light rails are really quiet. So we just need to be aware of your surroundings when close by a light rail. Once you get onto the light rail, it's the same rules as a bus and a train. There is a designated area where you can park your pram and of course ensure that your children are seated. So we've now come to the end of today's PD in Your Pocket. And I've just linked here some useful and practical resources. So these should be available in your booklets. If not, you can always reference this later. And another one that I just want to quickly show you is called See More Safety. So See More Safety is a program run by the Kids Foundation, and the Kids Foundation creates resources to empower and educate children and families on ways to prevent injuries and trauma. So they have really fantastic age-appropriate resources for children. So definitely check that website out. And of course, our good friends at Kids and Traffic, amazing resources. So we have something different in today's PD in Your Pocket. We have a little reflection questions to recap what we've learned today. So there's a few true and false questions, a few multiple choice answers, and this should come up as a poll. So after this is completed, we can move on to other question time for other things that you may have had. So let's open this up. Now, can everyone see that? Yep. Wonderful. So I'm going to give you all, perhaps let's say, a minute or two and just work through those. And we can have a look at the answers together after. Okay, so we're almost at a minute and a half, and I can see your answers flying in. And so far, everyone has 100% correct for the first two. So let's go through them. So question 1, a transport risk assessment must be conducted before a service transports a child. True or false? Of course, that's true. Before seeking authorization to transport children, staff must complete a risk assessment. So well done. Everyone's got that one correct. Number 2, you can use a car seat that's expired 11 years ago. Of course, you are all correct. That is false. Child restraints and boosters usually have an expiration date between 6 and 10 years. Okay, so let's get to question 3. It's a mixed bag here. There's a 40-60 split. So let's look at the question. Your family daycare attends a regular playgroup meetup every Wednesday at 10 a.m. Authorization is needed each time this regular outing is conducted. So 40% of you said true, while 60% of you said false. So let's have a look. The answer, of course, is false. If an excursion is a regular outing, the authorization is only required every 12 months. However, seek a new authorization if the nature of the outing changes. So well done on that one. Let's go to number 4. Which national quality standard best relates to the safe transport of children? Which of course is quality area 2, which you all got correct. 88% of you got that. And that is, what we spoke about earlier, which is element 2.2.1, supervision, and element 2.2.2, incident and emergency management. Question 5, which key family daycare policy should you be aware of when it comes to the safe transportation of children? Amazing, you've all got this right, which of course is excursions, and other policies that you should have in place at your family daycare in relation to safe transportation are of course accident and injury, authorization to transport, excursions, transport risk assessment, supervision, administration of first aid, child protection, medical conditions, transporting other than as part of an excursion, and signing in and out. And our very last question to wrap up tonight, what is the purpose of a risk assessment for safe transport? Which is B, risk assessments must be carried out to identify and assess risks to children's safety and health and well-being. Wonderful, and you all got that correct. I'm going to end the poll now. And I'm going to share your results. So here we are. Well done, everyone. Now we've come to the end of today. Does anyone have any other questions? Perhaps they want to post in the chat box, and if I don't get to it, I'm more than happy to email a response. Yep. Yep. Wonderful. You're very welcome, everyone. So, of course, to find out more, you can participate in PD in Your Pocket. We have a Facebook group. And if you haven't already joined, if you haven't already joined, open Facebook and type in PD in Your Pocket. And of course, our next one will be the 25th installment of PD in Your Pocket. And I think that's next month. And it is asthma, anaphylaxis, and allergies. Yeah. So thank you all so much. I hope you've learned something today and you have some new takeaways, and you can reflect on your own practice. So this project is funded by the New South Wales Department of Education through the Sector Development Program. And I'd like to thank you all, everybody, for participating, and also all your responses in the chat. And I hope you enjoy. See you next month. Bye.